Standing in that funeral parlor, watching my brother Preston grip the podium with his perfectly manicured hands, I never imagined the next 60 seconds would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The room was packed with relatives, Mom's former colleagues from the hospital, neighbors who'd known us since we were kids. Preston cleared his throat and the murmuring stopped instantly. He always did command a room. "Before we conclude today's service," he began, his voice carrying that practiced tremor of grief he'd perfected over the past 3 days, "I need to share something important about Mom's final wishes." I shifted in my front row seat, the hard wooden pew creaking beneath me. Aunt Bee sat to my left, clutching her handkerchief. Uncle Raymond was on my right, his weathered face stoic as always. We all leaned forward slightly, waiting. "Mom left everything to me," Preston announced, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. The house, her savings, her jewelry collection, all of it. I know this might come as a surprise to some of you, especially to my sister Melinda, but Mom made this decision because I was the one who took care of her these last 3 years. I gave up my bachelor lifestyle, potential relationships, business opportunities, all to ensure she had the best care possible in her final days. The room filled with sympathetic nods. Mrs. Henderson from across the street whispered to her husband about how devoted Preston had been. Someone behind me muttered, "What a good son," just loud enough for everyone to hear. Even I found myself nodding unconsciously, because hadn't he? Hadn't Preston been the one who moved Mom into his big house, managed her medications, drove her to every doctor's appointment while I was teaching 5th graders in Cincinnati? Preston continued, his voice growing stronger. "I don't share this for praise or recognition. I share it because Mom wanted everyone to know that her decision was deliberate and thoughtful. She told me just last month, 'Preston, you sacrificed everything for me. It's only right that you receive everything I have left to give.'" That's when Judge Cornelius Webb stood up from the back row. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor cut through the room like a knife. Everyone turned. Judge Webb had been our family lawyer for 30 years, Dad's best friend before that. In all that time, I'd never seen him interrupt anything, much less a funeral service. His usually kind face was stern behind his wire-rimmed glasses, and his hands were trembling slightly as he held his phone. "Mr. Hartley," Judge Webb said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "I'm afraid that's not accurate." Preston's confident smile froze on his face. "Judge Webb, perhaps we could discuss this after—" "No, we cannot," Judge Webb interrupted firmly. "Your mother changed her will the night before she passed. I have the documentation right here, properly witnessed and notarized. Dorothy was very specific about when this information should be shared, and that time is now." The funeral parlor erupted in whispers. Preston's face had gone from confused to pale, his hands gripping the podium so hard his knuckles went white. "That's impossible. Mom wasn't of sound mind those last few days. The pain medications made her confused, delusional even." Judge Webb walked slowly down the center aisle, every footstep echoing in the sudden silence. "Your mother anticipated you would say that, Preston. That's why she left this recording about the special medicine you were giving her. She wanted everyone to hear the truth." "This is highly inappropriate." Preston's voice cracked, no longer smooth and controlled. "Whatever confused rambling my poor mother recorded in her final days has no place." Judge Webb held up his phone, and Mom's voice suddenly filled the room, weak but crystal clear. "Preston, my son, I know what you've been doing to me." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Preston's face went from pale to ghost white, his whole body seeming to deflate. Someone gasped. Aunt Bee grabbed my hand, her fingers ice cold. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at the phone in Judge Webb's hand as my dead mother's voice continued. "The pills you've been putting in my tea aren't vitamins from Canada. I know what they really are, and I know why you've been giving them to me. But more importantly, everyone listening to this needs to know the truth about my devoted son and what he's really been doing these past 3 years." Preston made a lunging motion toward Judge Webb, but Uncle Raymond and 2 other men stood up, blocking his path. Preston looked around wildly, like a trapped animal, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my brother's eyes. The recording continued, and with each word, the fairy tale of the devoted son caring for his ailing mother crumbled, revealing something so dark, so calculated that even now, standing in this room full of witnesses, I could barely believe it was happening. My mother had known she was going to die. She had known who was responsible. And from beyond the grave, she was about to destroy the son who had tried to destroy her. 3 days earlier, I'd gotten the call that changed everything. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was already awake, grading spelling tests at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee when Preston's name appeared on my phone screen. He never called this early. "Melinda," he said, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Preston always called me Mel or Little Sister, never my full name. Mom passed away last night, peacefully, in her sleep. The hospice nurse said she just stopped breathing around midnight. The spelling test in my hand fell to the floor, red ink bleeding across little Tommy Martinez's carefully printed words. I remember staring at it, thinking absurdly that I'd have to print a new one. While Preston kept talking about funeral arrangements and flowers and things that seemed impossible, because Mom couldn't be dead. She'd left me a voicemail just 2 days ago, though I hadn't been able to understand most of it. Her words had been slurred, confused. Something about birds in her room and Dad coming to visit, even though Dad had been gone for 10 years. The drive from Cincinnati to Hartford County took 6 hours, and I spent every mile drowning in guilt. When was the last time I'd visited? 3 weeks? 4? The days blended together during the school year, and Preston always had excuses ready when I called to plan visits. Mom was having a bad day. The new medication made her too drowsy for company. The doctor advised limiting stimulation. It had been so easy to accept those excuses, to promise myself I'd visit next weekend, then the next. Preston had moved Mom into his colonial house 3 years ago, right after her second fall. I'd been there for the family meeting at Riverside Cafe, Mom's favorite breakfast spot. She'd sat between us, her coffee going cold, while Preston laid out his plan with the efficiency of the real estate presentations he gave to clients. "The house has everything," he'd said, sliding photos across the table like he was making a sale. First floor bedroom with an attached bathroom, wider doorways for when she needs a wheelchair, and I can convert the study into a nurse's station if we need round-the-clock care later. I'd looked at my own situation then. A 2-bedroom apartment with stairs, a teacher's salary that barely covered my student loans, and a schedule packed with parent conferences and after-school tutoring. Preston had seen my face and reached across the table to pat my hand, his Rolex catching the morning light. "Melinda, sweetie, you focus on those kids you teach," Mom had said, covering both our hands with hers. I remember how thin her fingers felt, how the veins stood out blue against her pale skin. "Your brother has the space and the money. Let him do this for me." Preston had smiled then, that same confident smile he'd worn since high school when he'd won class president 3 years running. "It's really no sacrifice, Mom. The house is too big for just me anyway, and my home office means I can work and be there for you at the same time." Now, pulling into Preston's circular driveway, I saw his Mercedes parked at its usual perfect angle, the house looking like something from an architectural magazine. The landscaping was immaculate even in January, evergreen shrubs trimmed into perfect spheres, the walkway cleared of any trace of snow. This was where Mom had spent her last 3 years, in this showcase house that looked nothing like the cozy ranch where we'd grown up. Preston met me at the door wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He pulled me into a hug that smelled like expensive cologne and something else, maybe scotch, though it was barely noon. "How are you holding up?" I asked when he finally let go. "I'm managing," he said, leading me through the marble foyer. "I've handled all the arrangements. Brennan's funeral home, the best in the county. White roses everywhere, just like she would have wanted. The obituary will run in tomorrow's paper, and I've already contacted her old colleagues from the hospital." He was talking fast, the way he did when he was closing a big deal, and I realized this was how he was coping, by turning grief into a checklist. We walked past the formal living room nobody ever used, past his office with its wall of real estate awards, to the kitchen where Aunt Bee was sitting at the granite island, her eyes red and puffy. "Oh, Melinda," she said, wrapping me in a lavender-scented embrace. "Your poor brother's been so strong, handling everything. Your mother was so lucky to have him these last years." Preston was already pulling out his phone, showing me photos of flower arrangements, discussing the program layout for the service. Everything was decided, organized, perfect. Just like Preston himself, managing death with the same cold efficiency he managed property sales. I nodded along, too numb to object, too guilty to assert any opinions about my own mother's funeral. If only I'd known what was coming. If only I'd asked the right questions then, in that pristine kitchen, while there was still time to search for the truth. The funeral service was beautiful, I had to admit. Preston had thought of everything. Brennan's funeral home looked more like an upscale hotel than a mortuary, with its crown molding and soft lighting that somehow made everyone look peaceful rather than grief-stricken. The main parlor could hold 200 people, and it was nearly full. Mom would have been amazed at the turnout, though she would have fussed about people making such a fuss over her. The photo montage Preston had commissioned played on loop on screens positioned throughout the room. Mom at 25 in her crisp nursing uniform, that bright smile that could calm any patient. Mom and Dad's wedding photo, him in his army uniform, her in the simple white dress she'd sewn herself. Christmas mornings with Preston and me tearing through wrapping paper, Mom receiving her 40-year service award from Hartford General Hospital. Each image dissolved into the next, set to the classical music she'd loved but rarely had time to listen to. When Reverend Morrison finished the opening prayers and invited family members to speak, Preston stood immediately, smoothing his black suit jacket as he walked to the podium with measured steps. He'd always been the performer in the family, the one who never missed a school play, who joined debate team and Model UN. Even grieving, he moved like he was on stage. "Our mother was a saint," he began, his voice perfectly modulated to reach the back rows without seeming to shout. Dorothy Ann Hartley dedicated 40 years to nursing, to healing. Others, to being the steady hand that held yours when you were scared and alone in a hospital bed. She was the night shift nurse who sang lullabies to crying children, the one who stayed past her shift to comfort a dying patient who had no family. Several people were nodding, dabbing their eyes. Mrs. Chen, who Mom had cared for during her chemotherapy 20 years ago, was openly weeping. Preston paused, letting the emotion build before continuing. But in her final years, when she needed care herself, when arthritis made it hard for her to open a jar and her heart condition meant she couldn't climb stairs anymore, I was honored to return that love. These last 3 years weren't easy. There were medications to manage, 7 different prescriptions that had to be taken at exact times, doctor visits twice a week, sometimes more, physical therapy that she hated but needed, sleepless nights when she'd call out in pain, and I'd sit with her until sunrise, holding her hand the way she'd held so many hands over the years. Uncle Raymond leaned over to his wife and whispered loud enough for our row to hear, "That boy's a saint himself, taking on all that responsibility." Preston's eyes were glistening now, and he pulled out a handkerchief to dab at them. The gesture looked practiced but effective. But I never complained. How could I? She gave us everything. She worked double shifts to pay for my college. She mortgaged the house again to help Melinda get through her teaching degree. She went without so we could have everything we needed and most of what we wanted. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. He was right about the sacrifices Mom had made. I remembered her eating toast for dinner so Preston and I could have meat, wearing the same winter coat for 15 years while making sure we had new ones every growth spurt. Which is why, Preston continued, his voice growing stronger, what I'm about to share shouldn't surprise anyone who truly knew Dorothy Hartley and understood her practical nature. He looked directly at me then, and something in his expression made my skin prickle. Last month, during one of her lucid periods, Mom told me she was updating her will. She called me into her room one evening and took my hand. "Preston," she said, "you've sacrificed so much. Your time, your freedom, potential relationships. I see how you've put your life on hold for me." The room was completely silent now except for the soft hum of the heating system. Preston continued, still looking at me. "She told me she'd made a decision. The house on Maple Street where we grew up, her savings accounts, her jewelry collection, including our grandmother's pieces, everything would come to me." "Melinda will understand," she said. "She has her own life, her teaching career, her apartment in Cincinnati. She doesn't need the burden of managing an estate, and you've earned this through your devotion." My stomach turned to ice. The engagement ring Mom had promised. Me, when I was 12, sitting on her bed as she showed me Dad's proposal spot in her photo album, the pearl necklace from my grandmother that was supposed to pass to the first granddaughter. All of it going to Preston? Aunt B patted my hand sympathetically. "It's what your mother wanted, dear. You have to respect her wishes." Everyone was nodding, murmuring agreement about Preston's sacrifice and Mom's wisdom in recognizing it. Of course, Preston deserved it. St. Preston, who'd given up his bachelor lifestyle, who'd turned his showcase home into a nursing facility, who'd spent 3 years as a full-time caregiver while running his real estate empire. I opened my mouth to say something, though I wasn't sure what words would come out. Did I want to contest this? Could I? Mom had been confused lately, but she'd also been living entirely under Preston's care. If she'd made this decision, who was I to challenge it? But before I could speak, a voice came from the back of the room, cutting through the murmurs of sympathy and agreement like a blade through silk. "Mr. Hartley, I apologize for the interruption, but I need to address this immediately." Every head in the room turned toward that voice, and the silence that followed was absolute. Judge Cornelius Webb wasn't a man who interrupted funeral services. In his 30 years as our family lawyer, he'd handled Dad's estate with quiet dignity, never speaking above a conversational tone, never making waves. He'd been at every major family event since I was 10, always in the background, a steady presence in his conservative suits and wire-rimmed glasses. So when he stood up in the back row of my mother's funeral, every person in that room knew something extraordinary was happening. Judge Webb, Preston's confident smile cracked slightly, like a tiny fissure in expensive marble. "Is there perhaps something we could discuss after the service?" "I'm afraid not, Preston." Judge Webb walked forward, his footsteps deliberate on the carpeted aisle. He was carrying a leather briefcase I recognized from decades of family meetings, the same one he'd brought when he helped Mom refinance the house for our college funds. "Your mother specifically instructed me to address this matter if you made any public declarations about her estate." The room seemed to shrink, 200 people collectively holding their breath. Preston's hands gripped the podium edges, his knuckles going white against the dark wood. "Judge Webb, with all due respect, this is highly inappropriate. We're in the middle of my mother's funeral." "Your mother called me 2 nights before she passed," Judge Webb continued, now standing just a few feet from the podium. "It was 11:47 p.m. precisely. I remember because I was already in bed, and when I saw Dorothy's number, I knew it had to be urgent. She'd never called that late in all the years I'd known her." Preston's face shifted from confused to something harder to read. Fear? Anger? Mom wasn't well those last few days. The combination of medications often made her confused, especially at night. She sometimes thought Dad was still alive, called out for people who'd been dead for years. "That's what she said you'd claim," Judge Webb replied, setting his briefcase on the front pew and opening it with practiced efficiency, "which is why she insisted I come immediately. I drove to your house that night, Preston. You were asleep on the couch in the living room when I arrived. Your mother met me at the door herself, walking with her cane, but completely lucid." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aunt B's hand tightened on mine. Preston's face had gone pale, that golden tan he maintained year-round, suddenly looking sickly under the funeral home lights. "That's impossible," Preston said, his voice rising. "Mom couldn't walk unassisted. She hadn't been able to for months." "She could, when she hadn't taken the special medicine you gave her," Judge Webb said, pulling out a manila folder. "We completed new estate documents in her bedroom that night. She was very specific about her wishes and her reasons for changing them. I brought my assistant, Margaret Holloway, as a witness. She's here today if anyone would like to verify this account." A woman in the third row raised her hand slightly, nodding. I recognized her from Judge Webb's office, a serious woman who'd been his paralegal for 20 years. Preston stepped away from the podium, his composure finally cracking completely. "This is insane. You're telling me you snuck into my house in the middle of the night to change legal documents with a woman who was clearly suffering from dementia." "I didn't sneak anywhere," Judge Webb said calmly. Your mother called me, met me at the door, and led me to her room. She showed me bank statements, Preston. Statements showing systematic withdrawals from her accounts. $300,000 over 3 years, transferred in small enough increments to avoid automatic flags. She also showed me an inventory of jewelry that had supposedly been put in storage for safekeeping. Every piece was photographed and documented, but when she asked to see them last month, you told her they were at the bank. The bank has no record of any safety deposit box. The crowd was no longer silent. Whispers rose like a tide, people turning to each other in shock. Mrs. Henderson was shaking her head in disbelief. Uncle Raymond had stood up, his face dark with anger. "Mom also told me about the pills," Judge Webb continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "The unmarked white pills you said were a special arthritis medication from Canada. She'd been hiding them instead of taking them for a week before she called me. Her mind cleared remarkably once she stopped taking them. She had one of her old nursing colleagues analyze them. Risperidone and lorazepam, Preston, antipsychotics and sedatives that, in elderly patients, cause exactly the symptoms your mother was experiencing. Confusion, memory loss, excessive drowsiness, difficulty walking. You're accusing me of drugging my mother." Preston's voice was almost a shriek now, all pretense of composure gone. "I cared for her. I gave up everything." Judge Webb pulled out his phone. "Your mother knew you'd react this way. She insisted on recording a message for this exact moment. She wanted everyone to hear the truth in her own words, particularly her daughter, Melinda, who she said had been calling every day, despite what you told her about Melinda not wanting to visit anymore." My heart stopped. What? I called constantly. Preston always said she was sleeping or too confused for phone calls. Judge Webb looked at me with infinite kindness. "Your mother knew, Melinda. She figured it out, and she made sure everything would be set right." He held up his phone, thumb hovering over the play button. "This recording was made 2 nights before Dorothy passed, witnessed by myself and Margaret. Dorothy specifically requested it be played if Preston made any claims about her estate." Preston made a sudden move toward Judge Webb, but Uncle Raymond and 2 other men stepped into the aisle, blocking his path. Preston looked around wildly, trapped between the podium and the men who'd just moments ago been praising his devotion. Judge Webb pressed play. Mom's voice filled the funeral parlor, and hearing it made my chest tighten with fresh grief. But this wasn't the confused, slurred voice from her recent voicemails. This was clear, determined, the mom who'd worked 12-hour shifts and still came home to help with homework. "My name is Dorothy Ann Hartley. Today is January 14th, 2025, and I am of sound mind despite what my son Preston may claim. I am recording this because I fear I don't have much time left, and the truth needs to be known." Preston lunged forward again, more desperately this time. "Turn that off. This is a violation of privacy. Mom was sick. She was paranoid." Uncle Raymond stepped fully into the aisle, his construction worker's frame blocking Preston completely. "Let Dorothy speak," he said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Mom's recording continued. 3 months ago, I discovered Preston has been stealing from my accounts. It started small, a few hundred here and there, but the amounts grew larger. The savings account Harold and I built over 40 years, the one meant to ensure I could afford good care, has been drained to almost nothing. 30,000 remains from the 350,000 we saved. Gasps and cries erupted throughout the room. Someone behind me whispered, "Dear God." "But the money isn't the worst part," Mom's voice went on. "Preston sold my jewelry, pieces that belonged to his grandmother and great-grandmother, the pearl necklace that was supposed to go to Melinda on her wedding day, the sapphire ring Harold gave me for our 25th anniversary, my mother's diamond brooch that survived the Depression. All gone. When I confronted him about finding the receipts from the pawn shops, that's when the special medicine started." My legs felt weak. Aunt Bee was gripping my arm, holding me upright. The pearl necklace. Mom had shown it to me every birthday since I was 12, telling me about how my grandfather had saved for 2 years to buy it for my grandmother. Every evening at 6 o'clock, Preston would bring me chamomile tea with 2 white pills. He said they were a new arthritis medication from Canada that his doctor friend recommended. They made me so tired I could barely stay awake past 7. My mind became foggy. I couldn't remember if I'd eaten breakfast or what day it was. I started believing people were visiting who hadn't come, seeing things that weren't there. Preston's face had gone from white to gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. She was hallucinating. This proves she wasn't competent. Mom's voice grew stronger. But last week, when Preston went to show a house, I managed to drop the pills behind my bed instead of taking them. I pretended to be asleep when he checked on me. After 3 days without them, my mind began to clear. I remembered the notebook I'd hidden in my knitting basket, where I'd been documenting everything when I could think straight. I called my friend Nancy, who worked in psychiatric nursing for 30 years. I described the pills to her, and she knew immediately. Risperidone and lorazepam, medications that should never be given to elderly patients without careful monitoring because they cause exactly what I was experiencing. The recording paused for a moment, just Mom's labored breathing audible. Then she continued, her voice breaking slightly. What hurts most is how Preston isolated me from Melinda. My daughter called every single day. I know because I found the phone records he thought he'd hidden. 63 calls in the last month alone. He told her I was too sick to talk, too confused, that visits would upset me. He told me she was too busy with her life, that she'd said I was becoming a burden. He deleted her voicemails before I could hear them. My sweet Melinda, who sent cards every week that he threw away, who he told me had forgotten my birthday when really he'd hidden her gift in his closet. Tears were streaming down my face. All those times Preston said Mom was sleeping, all those unreturned calls I thought meant she no longer recognized my voice. I've documented everything, Mom continued. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers totaling $312,000. Receipts from pawn shops for jewelry worth another $40,000. The prescription bottles for medications I never authorized. Judge Webb has copies of everything, and so does the Hartford County Sheriff's Department. The mention of law enforcement sent another wave of shock through the room. Preston was backing away from the podium now, looking for an exit. But people had stood up in every row, blocking the aisles. So I am leaving everything to Melinda, Mom's voice said firmly. The house on Maple Street, what remains of my savings, and what jewelry Preston hasn't sold. Preston will receive $1, as required by law to acknowledge him in the will. I know this seems harsh, but Preston has already taken his inheritance, and more through deception and cruelty. Mom paused again, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. Preston, if you're listening to this, I want you to know that I forgive you. I don't know what debts or problems drove you to this, but I forgive you. However, forgiveness doesn't mean avoiding consequences. What you've done is elder abuse and fraud. You drugged your mother to steal from her while telling everyone what a devoted son you were. You robbed me not just of money, but of my daughter's presence in my final years. The recording crackled slightly, then Mom's voice came through one last time. Melinda, honey, I knew you never stopped trying to reach me. A mother knows her daughter's heart. I love you, and I'm sorry we lost so much time. Take care of yourself, trust your instincts, and remember that love isn't measured in money or things, but in truth and genuine care. Judge Webb will make sure everything is handled properly. And Preston, I hope someday you understand that what you stole from yourself, your integrity, and your family's trust is worth far more than any amount of money. The recording ended. The silence was deafening until we heard the sirens approaching, growing louder by the second. 2 police officers entered the funeral parlor quietly, respectfully. Detective Sharon Pike approached Preston with measured steps, her badge visible, but her manner calm. Mr. Hartley, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding elder abuse and financial exploitation charges. Preston looked around wildly, seeking support from the crowd that had been nodding along to his eulogy just minutes ago. Now they all stepped back, creating a clear path between him and the officers. This is insane. I took care of her. I gave up everything. My business suffered. I lost relationships. I spent every day making sure she had what she needed. You gave up nothing, I said, finding my voice at last. The words came out stronger than I expected, powered by 3 years of suppressed doubt and fresh anger. You saw an opportunity and you took it. Mom trusted you with her life, and you poisoned her, isolated her, and robbed her blind while accepting praise for your sacrifice. Preston turned to me, his face twisted with desperation. "You don't understand, Melinda. The real estate market crashed last year. I had 3 properties in foreclosure, debts you can't imagine. I was going to lose everything, the house, the business, my reputation. Mom would have wanted to help me if she knew." "She would have," I agreed, stepping closer to him. "If you'd asked, if you'd been honest, if you'd treated her like a mother instead of a bank account. But instead, you chose to drug her and steal from her while she was helpless." Detective Pike placed a hand on Preston's arm. "Mr. Hartley, we need to go now." As they led him toward the door, Preston turned back one more time. "I did take care of her. The meals, the medications, the doctor appointments, that was all real." "So was the theft," Judge Webb said quietly, "and the drugs, and the lies you told to keep Melinda away." The funeral parlor slowly emptied after that. People didn't know what to say, offering awkward condolences mixed with shock. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand and whispered, "Your mother was a fighter to the end." Uncle Raymond hugged me tightly and promised to help however he could. One by one, they filed out until it was just me, Judge Webb, and Aunt Bee in that too-perfect room with its white roses and classical music still playing softly. Judge Webb handed me an envelope with my name written in Mom's shaky handwriting. "She wrote this for you separately. She wanted you to read it when you were ready." I opened it with trembling hands, the paper soft and worn like she'd touched it many times. "My dearest Melinda, if you're reading this, then Judge Webb has done what I asked. I'm sorry for the pain this truth has caused you. Please don't blame yourself for not seeing it sooner. Preston fooled me too, and I lived with him. He was always so good at showing people what they wanted to see. But here's what I need you to know. Those weekends you did manage to visit, when you'd read to me from your student stories or brush my hair while telling me about your classroom, those were the moments I held on to when the medicine made everything foggy. Your love saved me, gave me the strength to fight back when I realized what was happening. The house is yours now, but more importantly, you have the truth. Don't let guilt eat at you. You called every day. You tried to visit. You sent cards and gifts. I know because I found them all hidden in Preston's closet after I stopped taking those pills. That recording of your students singing happy birthday to me that Preston said never arrived, I found it on his phone. Take care of yourself, trust your instincts, and remember that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choosing love over greed, truth over comfort, protection over reputation. All my love forever, Mom." 6 months later, I stood in Mom's garden, now my garden, planting the white roses she'd loved but never had energy to tend in her final years. Preston was serving 5 years for elder abuse, fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. The house on Maple Street felt different without Mom's laughter, but also without the shadow of Preston's deception. I'd found her journals hidden throughout the house, tucked in places Preston never thought to look, documenting everything when her mind was clear. The last entry, dated the night before she died, simply read, "Melinda called today. Preston said she didn't, but I heard the phone ring exactly at 7 p.m. like always. Tomorrow, Judge Webb will fix everything. My daughter will know I never stopped loving her, never stopped waiting for her calls. Tonight, I can finally sleep peacefully." I kept Preston's dollar, the one Mom left him in the will, framed on the wall, not as a cruel reminder, but as a lesson. Sometimes the people who claim to sacrifice the most are actually taking everything. Sometimes those who appear the most devoted are the most dangerous. And sometimes a mother's love is strongest not in what she gives, but in what she refuses to let be stolen, even if it means fighting from her deathbed. The garden blooms every spring now, white roses reaching toward the sun. I see Mom in every petal, not as a victim, but as a warrior who won her final battle. When people ask about Preston, I tell them the truth. He was my brother, he made his choices, and our mother made sure those choices had consequences, because that's what real love looks like. Not enabling or excusing harm, but protecting the innocent and ensuring justice, even when the guilty share your blood, even when you won't be there to see it served. Mom saw it all, though. She knew exactly what she was doing when she called Judge Webb that night, when she hid those pills, when she gathered her evidence. She saved me even after she was gone, and that's the kind of love that never dies. If this story touched you, Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps these important stories reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful true life stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit and the power of truth. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story. And remember, sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the truth that sets us free.